mentioned the media can be a powerful force for peace, and currently it doesn't seem to be that way. So I'm wondering, what is your take on how the silencing of opinions like that has happened and why it's happened? Does it have to do with this idea of access of evil, where if they don't toe the official line, journalists feel like their sources or access to information will be cut off? Is it that conscious? What do you think is behind it?
I think it's somewhat complicated. What changes journalists, especially those who begin their career questioning and going into journalism for all the right reasons, and then slowly but surely climb that corporate ladder within their news organizations by increasingly not asking the questions. No one wants to get iced out of a White House press conference, not get to ask the president a question. And the way you get chosen is you ask softballs of the press secretary. So by the time the president shows up, they know who will ask the easiest questions, and they're the ones who can bring back those gems to their newsrooms. I got an answer from the president. He answered my question, but I don't really think those are gems or diamonds. Maybe pieces of coal, and all that coal has to be questioned that is dug up in this country, because it's absolutely essential that we do our jobs. It's as simple as that, whether we're talking about war or we're talking about climate change. So let's go to that issue of climate change. Mm-hmm. We cover all the UN climate summits. We were from 2009. We were in Copenhagen. We were in Doha. We were in Durban. We were in Cancun. We were at the People's Summit in Bolivia. And this year we were in Warsaw, Poland. And we'll go next year to Peru and then to a binding summit. At least that's what it's supposed to be in 2015 in Paris. And why do we go? The U.S. media, we're the only ones who do a daily hour from there. But you might say, why waste the fuel? Even the jet engine fuel, is wasted because so little comes from these summits. But it's not so much the people negotiating inside. It is the thousands who come because they are so gravely concerned about what's happening to the planet, particularly those at the target end of climate change. We create the greenhouse gases in the industrialized world, and particularly in the United States, and they suffer the consequences, the desertification of Africa, the submerging of island nations, that they will literally be underwater. And we experience it in the United States. It's not just there. It's just not identified in that way, right? Whether we're talking about mudslides or fires, whether we're talking about a drought that is worse than the Dust Bowl conditions, of decades ago, whether we're talking about Superstorm Sandy and these violent hurricanes and unpredictable and increasing rain in very small amounts of time. All of this we have to cover. Now, in the rest of the world, yes, there's debate in their media about how best to deal with what could be best described not even so much as climate change, but climate disruption, even more than talking about global warming, climate disruption. So the debates are, how do you deal with it? In this country, does it exist, right? Does climate change exist, and is it caused by human beings? When the overwhelming consensus in the world, the scientific consensus, is yes, it's driven by human beings, the vast majority of it. So the debate is what to do about it. But in our country, it's whether it exists. Because of the money that is drowning politics in the United States, like the Koch brothers and others. They set up these faux think tanks, these, it's hard to call them, they set up these, what some have called stink tanks, right? They can't completely deny it, so they obfuscate it. They say there has to be more studies done. And it is up to the press to show the lie. Not to say there are those who say it doesn't exist, and there are those who say it does exist. So maybe it's somewhere in between. No, not when there are lies being told. It's not somewhere in between. It's our role in the media to dig deep and get to the truth. And you don't even have to dig that deep when it comes to climate change. We know it's been proven.
You know, that sort of points to this element of sort of commercial, I hesitate to even call it journalism, but the 24-hour news networks, there is this tendency that they have, which is absolutely infuriating, where they feel the need to have, spokespeople for either side of an issue. And they seem very concerned with getting someone from the left and someone from the right. I wonder, why aren't they just going to an expert? Why don't they have a climate scientist on rather than spokespeople for the Democratic and Republican Party, let's say?
Why wouldn't they have spokespeople for the Democratic and Republican? Why do they have for the Democratic and Republican Party when talking about climate change?
Right,
It's a very good question.
Yeah, they're journalists. They should be going to the source, right?
Right, and that has to be challenged. Also, what has to be looked at is the meteorologists and all the networks. They are the reason so often people tune into television and radio just to see what the weather's like outside, right? And what are you going to wear that day? But it's not just about what are you going to wear, it's what can you do about it. And there's a lot you can do about it if you understand how it works, that we can change this. We can change the direction this planet is going. And there's no better place to do it than with meteorologists. And we have to demand of these meteorologists on the networks that they not only flash the words climate change or global warming, rather they not only flash the words severe weather or extreme weather, in the lower third it's called, when they're reporting on some extreme situation, but climate change, global warming. And when you see that flashed, you make the connections, because these seem like very disparate events, these weather events. You got hailstones that are the size of baseballs and golf balls that are busting the windshields of people in Colorado near Denver Airport a week ago, right in the middle of May. And then you've got forest fires in California because they're undergoing a statewide drought like they haven't seen in decades. It is terribly frightening, but everything looks like it's disconnected the way the media covers it. But it's all connected because it's about climate unpredictability and disruption. And that's our job. And people should press their local and national media for the meteorologists to be telling the truth. It's interesting when President Obama, when they just put out their climate assessment in the last few weeks, which is very interesting, by the way. We had on a guy from Columbia who's one of the authors of one of the chapters, but a scientist, as you accurately point out, we need to be talking to. But the reason this climate assessment was so important is they looked by regions in the United States, and they were very specific about what climate change is increasingly going to look like in Florida, what it's going to look like in Maine, in the Northeast, what it's going to look like in California. And when they released it, President Obama did interviews with meteorologists. Now, that's the beginning, right? The next day, for the first time I was watching MSNBC. For the first time, early in the morning, I saw the meteorologists deliver the weather, and then the news anchors, if you can call them that, let's just say the TV personalities who were on in the morning, turned to the weatherman and said, "Ooh, is that related to global warming?" CNN, the chief meteorologist for a long time was a climate denier, change denier. We're not just talking about Fox. It's really important that these meteorologists, it should be part of their training, is with climate change. I mean, we're talking about the fate of the planet. And we need a media like WMPG that, like Pacifica, like Democracy Now! On public television radio, that's not brought to us by the oil, the gas, the coal, the nuclear companies when we cover global warming. That's not brought to us by the weapons manufacturers when we cover drone strikes and war. That's not brought to us by the health insurance and big pharma, by drug companies when we cover health care, and not brought to us by the banks when we cover the growing inequality in this country. We need a media that is independent, brought to us by journalists and artists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I often wonder how it is that American society seems to be becoming increasingly uncritical, and we so often seem to fail to question the interests or motives behind a certain point of view. And just about climate change, it doesn't make sense to me personally how even if we grant that there were some question to what is causing climate change, it's pretty undeniable that it's happening. And I just wonder, how could it possibly be a bad thing to invest in research and development as a nation and try to lead the way for other nations? And wouldn't that return us to a place of leadership in the world where we could restore our economy? We would develop technologies that we could then export and sell.
Eric, you are talking too much sense. That is your problem. Really, you are talking about facts and what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. That's not what these networks are talking about. I mean, when they bring you the pundits, on all the issues, that same small group of people, that minority elite, and I'm not talking about people of color, they seem the same on all the networks. That small circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. Mm-hmm. They need to show us the interest behind these. So often they call them elder statesmen, we have it in every different field. You've got, for example, Henry Kissinger. We should know, and those who work for Kissinger Associates, when they come on, he is identified as an elder statesman, which companies and which countries he represents that he's being paid the big bucks for. Now, then you can make up your own mind
right
about what he has to say. The generals as well, and I think generals who don't do this would feel the same way. The generals who leave the military and go on to work with weapons manufacturers, and then they come on the air and they promote war. Mm-hmm. Maybe that they'd have that philosophy anyway, but those who are in the military are often very reluctant because they know the true pain of it. I mean, those are the voices, the vast majority of people in the military, or many of them, that you rarely hear from in the corporate media, who come home and are suffering so terribly, who are, waving red flags and saying, no, this is wrong, this is hurting so many, that you don't hear from. But knowing what are the interests of those who are on television. They're so often identified as just expert. You're saying, where are the experts? Well, they're definitely not the ones being identified as the experts. They need to be identified as working for companies that represent the very industries that profit from either climate change or war. Now, it's often posed, when it comes to the issue of global warming, as an issue of environment versus jobs. I was just listening to Senator Marco Rubio, who is considered a possible presidential candidate in 2016 for the Republican Party, the senator from Florida, saying that he doesn't believe that climate change is human-made, and then I listened to Joe Scarborough, the conservative Republican former Congress member who is the new television personality on MSNBC early in the morning, who said, if we're going to choose between jobs and the environment, I opt for jobs every time. Something like that was his comment. Why do we say that it's jobs versus the environment? It flies in the face of the facts. Mm-hmm. As you point out, Eric, I mean, when you talk about alternative forms of energy, these are job-intensive, building solar panels and windmills and decentralized forms of energy, cultivating them around the country that are the most energy efficient. This involves job after job after job. So if you talk about the environment, it is not juxtaposed against jobs. In fact, jobs proliferate. When you have to be more efficient, and like in Vermont, and a story I know very well, where my brother, also a journalist, lives, when they had to recover from Hurricane Irene. I mean, you use these moments when hundreds of bridges are swept away to become more efficient, become more climate conscious, and to make a more efficient, climate-friendly transportation grid. That is wisdom, and that is job enhancing.
Well, there seems to be a really problematic divide in this country between the institutions of power and the interests of citizens. So just for example, there's been this horrific spate of mass shootings. And by a wide margin, the public favors more sensible gun control and legislation doing something about this. In fact, one of the parents, the father of one of the women who was just shot by, what's his name, Elliot Rodger.
Elliot Rodger.
Yeah. Actually pointed specifically to that and said Congress has done, this happened in part because the Congress did nothing after Sandy Hook, even though we were all clamoring for something to happen. I guess where I'm going with this is, what do you see as sort of causing this divide, and what role has the media played in either exacerbating it, or what could it do to help diminish it?
Well, I mean, this is very important in this horrific attack that took place. I think you're talking about the father of one of the young men, Chris Martinez, who was killed, as he just cried out. His name is Richard Martinez. Why did Chris die? Chris died because of craven, irresponsible politicians and National Rifle Association. They talk about gun rights. What about Chris's right to live? When will the insanity stop? He said, when will enough people say, stop the madness? We don't have to live like this. Too many have died. We should say to ourselves, not one more. This in response to the massacre that took place at University of California, Santa Barbara, and the streets with this young, very disturbed man named Elliot Rodger, who'd been posting horrid videos on YouTube even before the day that he killed his 3 male roommates and then went out to kill young women who he just generically said girls had rejected him and he would prove he was the alpha male. I mean, that's, by the way, a very important story overall, aside from the horror of this moment, is to start challenging violence against women.
Absolutely.
Whether on college campuses across this country or anywhere. But the power of the NRA is astounding. I'll never forget right after Sandy Hook. It was on ABC. Again, I'm not talking about Fox. It was on ABC, on NBC this week with David Gregory, when he had on the head of the National Rifle Association, unchallenged, to talk about why this doesn't really have to do with guns. It is astounding the way journalism is conducted in this country, very much like politics. They go to where the money is, and instead of, that motto of a good journalist to follow the money, it's, you air the power quote, those who have power and money. And those who don't, the vast majority of people just don't get heard. So because of the political clout, because they have money, of the National Rifle Association, they play this absolutely disproportionate role in politics because, well, they pour money into candidates, and the media doesn't follow the money in terms of investigating it, but it just gives voice to those in money. It gives new meaning to the term money quote. And that has to be challenged.